She couldn't hear him following her, but she felt it, in the way a room changes when the wrong person enters it, in the half-second pause of strangers who look just past her instead of at her. 23 days, 7 locations, 1 grey sedan, and a police department that told her to keep a log. So Nora Callahan did the only thing left. She walked into a diner on the wrong side of Bakersfield and handed a note to the last man anyone would expect. What happened next put 100 motorcycles on a single city block and changed everything that man had calculated about who she was. Nora Callahan had never heard the sound of her own name. She'd been told it was beautiful. The way the letters fell together, soft and rounded, like stones worn smooth by a river. Her mother had chosen it from a book of Irish names, back when names still carried the weight of hope. But Nora had been born into silence, profound and total, the kind of deafness that no hearing aid could bridge and no surgery had been able to fix. For 40 years she had navigated a world that spoke in frequencies she couldn't access, and she had built something remarkable in its place. She had learned to read the world. Bakersfield, California, greeted the morning of October 14th with the kind of dry, pale heat that pressed against the skin like a warm hand. The San Joaquin Valley was like that. Seasons that didn't so much change as shift slightly, summer reluctant to release its grip, even as October rolled in. The sky above Truxtun Avenue was the color of faded denim, cloudless, and the air smelled faintly of diesel and dust, and the distant sweetness of almond orchards carried on the wind. Nora sat at her usual table in Morrow's Coffee, a narrow spot near the window where the morning light came in at an angle she liked. She had a small notebook open beside her cup, and she was sketching, not words, but shapes. She worked as a freelance graphic designer, a career she had fallen into almost by accident 15 years ago and had never left. Her laptop sat beside the notebook, its screen bright with color swatches and vector outlines. She watched the street with the particular attention of someone who had spent a lifetime compensating. A woman pushing a stroller, the baby's mouth open in what was probably a cry. 2 men in hard hats arguing over something on a clipboard, their body language tight and angular. A delivery truck double-parked, the driver jogging toward the coffee shop with a cardboard tray. She catalogued all of it automatically, her eyes moving with a precision that most people reserved for their ears. That was the thing no one understood about silence. It didn't make the world smaller. It made everything else louder in its own way. She was halfway through her second coffee when she noticed him. He was across the street, standing near the entrance to the hardware store that had been there since before she was born. Average height, brown jacket. He wasn't looking at the hardware store. He was looking at her. Nora didn't react. She had learned over many years that reacting too quickly to people who stared was often unnecessary. Plenty of people stared at her when she signed, or when she handed written notes to cashiers, or when she simply existed in a space that seemed to confuse them. But this man wasn't staring with confusion. He was watching with the quiet, deliberate focus of someone taking inventory. She looked back at her screen. In her peripheral vision, she kept him in frame. He was still there when she looked up 4 minutes later. Same posture, same stillness. Then a bus passed between them, and when it cleared, he was gone. Nora closed her notebook. She held her coffee cup with both hands and let the warmth travel up through her palms. It was nothing, probably. Bakersfield was full of people standing around. Men leaned against buildings and watched traffic. It didn't mean anything, but her body didn't agree. There was something at the base of her neck, not a sound, never a sound, but a vibration almost, a frequency she'd learned to trust over 40 years of reading rooms and faces and the invisible grammar of human behavior. Something had registered, and her body was filing it carefully away. She packed her laptop and walked the 6 blocks home through the October morning, pausing twice to check the reflections in shop windows. Both times, the street behind her was ordinary. People, movement, the steady grammar of a Tuesday. She didn't see him again. But she thought about him. Her apartment was on the second floor of a quiet building on Oak Street, a place she had rented for 7 years. She had chosen it for its light. Windows on 3 sides, the afternoon sun crossing the floors in long gold stripes, and for its community. Her neighbor to the left, an older man named Walter, always left his hall light on at night. She found comfort in that small, unconscious signal. The building had a rhythm she understood. She sat up at her desk and tried to focus on the logo project she'd been avoiding, a restaurant in Fresno that wanted something rustic but modern, which was the kind of brief that gave her trouble because it could mean almost anything. She worked for an hour, then 2, the apartment quiet in the particular way only she could fully appreciate. At 3:15 in the afternoon, she got a message from Cindy. "Still on for Thursday? Can cover the Whitmore meeting if you need me." Cindy Albright had been her interpreter for 12 years and her best friend for 11. The line between professional and personal had dissolved so gradually neither of them could mark the moment it happened. Cindy was the person Nora called, texted, when the world became too much, and the person who called, texted, her back within 3 minutes, always. "Thursday works," Nora typed back. "Hey, weird question. Have you ever had a feeling about someone, like they were watching you?" The 3 dots appeared almost immediately. "Watching like interested, or watching like creepy?" Nora looked at the screen for a moment. "Like they were taking notes," she typed. There was a pause longer than usual. "Tell me everything," Cindy wrote back. Nora did. There is a particular skill that comes from a lifetime of watching. The ability to recognize patterns before they become obvious. A conversation that shifts when you enter a room. A face that appears in 2 places it shouldn't. The small, almost imperceptible repetitions that most people filter out because they're too busy listening to other things. Nora had that skill. She had built it the way other people build muscle, through use, through necessity, through the particular discipline of someone who understood that attention was her primary tool. She began to notice the pattern 3 days after the hardware store. It was at the grocery store on Wednesday morning, the Vons on Stockdale Highway, where she did her weekly shopping, always early, when the aisles were empty and the employees were still stocking shelves. She was in the produce section, weighing tomatoes, when she caught a flash of brown in her peripheral vision. She turned casually the way she had practiced, not a snap, not a jerk, just the natural movement of someone checking the display behind them. The man from across the street was examining a bag of apples, 20 feet away. Brown jacket, same height, the same particular stillness. Nora set down the tomatoes. She breathed slowly, deliberately. She picked up a different tomato and examined it with complete focus, letting her peripheral vision do the work. He didn't approach. He didn't speak, not that it would have mattered. He simply stayed within sight, moving when she moved, maintaining a distance that would have seemed incidental to anyone not paying attention. She finished her shopping. She chose a checkout line on the opposite end of the store and made sure she was out the door and into the parking lot before he could have reached the registers. She sat in her car for 11 minutes, watching the entrance in her rearview mirror. He came out 4 minutes after she sat down. He stood in the automatic door's frame for a moment, and his eyes moved across the parking lot with a calm, searching quality that told her everything she needed to know. When his gaze reached her car, 3rd row, blue Honda Civic, it paused. Just a half second, maybe less. Then he walked to a grey sedan parked near the cart return and drove away. Nora sat with her hands in her lap and understood, with the clarity of someone who had stopped doubting their own perception a long time ago, that this was not a coincidence. This was a person who had decided something about her, who had selected her, who was, in the methodical and patient way of certain kinds of dangerous men, getting to know her schedule. She texted Cindy that same afternoon, and they met at Cindy's apartment, a cluttered, warm space in the Oleander neighborhood that always smelled of coffee and the lavender candles Cindy burned on her kitchen counter. Cindy listened with her whole body, leaning forward, signing back questions, her face moving through concern and anger and something harder to name. "You need to report this," Cindy signed. "I know," Nora signed back. "Today. Not next week. Today." The Bakersfield Police Department's non-emergency line accepted relay calls, and Cindy stayed on with her while Nora gave the report. A description of the man, just his jacket and his height, and his grey sedan, and the 2 confirmed sightings. The officer on the phone apparently told Cindy that 2 sightings in public spaces were not sufficient to constitute stalking under California law. No threats had been made. No contact had occurred. "He said to keep a log and call back if it escalates," Cindy told her. Nora looked at the ceiling for a moment. "A log," she signed. "I know. He walks behind a deaf woman at a grocery store, and I need a log." Cindy didn't have a sign for the thing she wanted to say, so she just put her hand on Nora's arm and kept it there. 2 days later, Nora met Travis Holt. It happened the way things in Bakersfield often happened, sideways, accidentally, with no particular ceremony. She had a client meeting at a print shop on Brundage Lane, a part of town where the businesses sat low and wide under the California sun, and the streets had a blunt, working quality. After the meeting, she was walking to her car when a motorcycle, impossibly loud even to her bones, even through the soles of her shoes, vibrated to a stop beside the curb, and a man got off with the unhurried movement of someone who had been riding since before she was born. He was large in the particular way of men who have done physical work their whole lives. Grey beard, thick forearms crossed with faded ink, a leather vest with a patch she recognized from news stories and cultural shorthand, the winged skull of the Hells Angels, and below it the word President. He was heading toward the diner next to the print shop. He held the door for her. It was such a small thing. He simply reached past her and held the door, the way people do, and nodded once, the universal acknowledgement of 2 people sharing a doorway. Nora nodded back. Inside, she took a seat at the counter and ordered with her notebook and pen, the way she always did in places where the staff didn't know her. The man settled into a booth with the ease of someone on familiar ground. 2 other men joined him shortly, big and bearded and leather-vested, and they talked with the comfortable shorthand of men who had known each other for years. She wasn't thinking about him when she left. She was thinking about the grey sedan she had seen, parked across from the print shop, engine off, no driver visible from where she stood. She was thinking about how she had seen it before. October deepened. The valley heat dropped 5 degrees, then 10, and the mornings came in cooler now, the light thinner and more honest. Nora's log, she had started keeping it, because what else could she do, had 7 entries over 12 days. The coffee shop, the grocery store, the print shop, a Thursday evening walk along the Kern River Parkway, the parking garage beneath the building where she had a dentist appointment. The street outside her apartment at 11:40 p.m. when she had looked out the window because a vibration woke her. A passing truck, probably, but the grey sedan was there, under the oak tree across the street, dark and still. 7 entries. 7 quiet, calculated invasions of the only world she had. She was not the kind of woman who frightened easily. She had been navigating a world that was not built for her since the day she was born, and she had developed a particular kind of practical courage that came from not having the option to be otherwise. She had been told as a child, by people who meant well and were wrong, that her life would be limited. She had signed those limitations politely and then ignored them. She had built a career, a home, a life with texture and warmth and purpose. But this was different. This was not the ordinary friction of a world designed for hearing people. This was a man who had looked at her and decided she was prey, who had made calculations about what she could and couldn't do, what she could and couldn't detect, how easy it would be. She knew men like this existed. She had read about them. She had simply never been their subject before. The morning of October 23rd, she was on her way back from the coffee shop, a different one now, rotating between three to disrupt any pattern, when she saw Dean Mercer at the end of her block. Not across the street this time, not at a distance designed to look incidental. He was standing on the sidewalk 30 feet from her front door, and he was watching her walk toward him. Nora stopped. He wasn't threatening in any obvious, demonstrable way. No gesture, no approach. But he was there, on her block, 30 feet from her door, and he had followed her to the grocery store and the print shop and the dentist and the river, and now he was here, and the log in her phone had 7 entries, and the police had told her to keep a log. She turned around. She walked 3 blocks east, went into a pharmacy, and stood near the vitamins for 20 minutes while her heartbeat did something complicated in her chest. When she came out, he was gone. That evening, she texted Cindy, "I need to do something different. The police aren't going to help me until something happens. I can't wait for something to happen." Cindy responded immediately, "What are you thinking?" Nora thought for a long moment. "The diner on Brundage. Do you know anyone who goes there?" A pause. Then, "The biker diner. Why?" "I met someone there. He seemed like someone who might understand certain kinds of problems." Another pause. Longer. "Nora, are you sure about this?" She looked at the window. The street below was ordinary, or appeared to be. The oak tree across from her building was dark. "No," she typed, "but I'm sure about everything else not working." She went to the diner the next afternoon, alone. She sat at the counter with her notebook and her coffee and waited, without any real plan, hoping that the world was the kind of place where the right people showed up when you needed them to. Travis Holt walked in 40 minutes later. She recognized him immediately. The grey beard, the vest, the particular gravity of his movement. He took the same booth. She watched in the mirror behind the counter as a young waitress brought him coffee without being asked. Nora took a breath. She wrote on a page of her notebook in clear block letters and carried it to his booth. She stood at a respectful distance and held the note so he could read it. "My name is Nora Callahan. I'm deaf. I'm being stalked. The police say the log isn't enough. I don't know why I'm telling you this. I think I just needed to tell someone who might actually do something." Travis looked at the note for a long time. Then he looked at her. Not the way Dean Mercer looked at her. Not the way strangers on the street sometimes looked at her, but with a directness that had nothing unkind in it. He pointed at the seat across from him. She sat down. He had a phone, and he typed on it and slid it across the table. "How long?" She typed back, 3 weeks of documented sightings. Probably longer before I was sure. Police told me to keep a log." He looked at that for a moment. Something moved across his face. Not anger exactly, more like recognition. Like a man who had seen this particular failure before. "Tell me everything," he typed. Nora had heard those words before. Cindy had said them too, in that exact order. She found, sitting in a diner on Brundage Lane across from a Hells Angels chapter president she had met by accident, that they were still the most helpful words in the English language. She told him everything. Travis Holt had been the president of the Bakersfield chapter of the Hells Angels for 11 years. Before that, he'd been a mechanic, a sergeant, a husband twice, and a father. He had seen enough of the world to know that it sorted people into 2 categories faster than it should, the ones who were expected to need help and the ones who were expected to provide it. He had spent most of his life being placed firmly in a 3rd category that the sorting system didn't have language for, the ones people crossed the street to avoid, who were assumed to be the problem, who existed in the cultural imagination as a kind of ambient threat. He was used to being misread. What Nora had told him over 40 minutes at that diner table, through the quiet medium of typed texts and a worn notebook, had landed in him with a weight he didn't immediately examine. The specifics were damning. 3 weeks of documented proximity, a grey sedan with a partial plate she had noted with the patience of someone who understood that details were currency. A pattern of sightings that described a man who was methodical and patient, and had chosen his subject with deliberate care. She had chosen well, from a predator's perspective. A deaf woman living alone in a city that tended to leave its quieter residents to their own devices. No dog. Second-floor apartment, accessible from an external stairway visible from the sidewalk. A predictable schedule, or one that had been predictable before she started rotating coffee shops. The part that stayed with Travis after Nora had left the diner with his number typed into her contacts and a promise that he would think about what could be done, was the log. 7 entries over 12 days, each one documented with time and location and a brief, precise description. No hysteria, no elaboration, just facts, laid out with the clean economy of someone who understood that feelings were not useful without evidence to support them. He showed the log to Buck Reeves that same evening, in the back room of the chapter's garage on Niles Street. Buck read it twice. He handed the phone back without a word. Then he said, "Man's been at her apartment building at night. 11:40 p.m. She felt the vibration, looked out, saw the car. And the cops said, keep a log." Buck was quiet for a moment. He had a daughter, 23, living in Fresno. Travis knew this. Travis was counting on it. "What are you thinking?" Buck asked. "I'm thinking a woman who can't hear shouldn't have to be afraid to look out her own window." "That's not an answer." "No," Travis said. "It's a reason." He made 3 calls that night. By the following morning, 11 members had been briefed. By the evening, the number was 34. The chapter had a protocol for certain kinds of community situations, informal, undocumented, the kind of thing that never appeared in any charter or official record, but existed as a shared understanding among men who had been on the wrong side of enough injustice to recognize it in other people. Travis texted Nora, "We'll need to see where this person goes. Can you keep your regular schedule Friday?" The pause before her response was long enough that he thought she might say no. "Yes," she typed. "What are you planning?" "To be visible," he replied. Friday, October 27th began as most October mornings did in Bakersfield. Cool, pale, the sky warming slowly through its layers of early light. Nora kept her regular routine. Coffee at Morrow's, laptop open, notebook beside her cup, the table by the window. She had told Cindy, who had come to sit with her, not signing today. Just 2 women at a coffee shop, nothing to see. Cindy was better at hiding her nerves than Nora would have expected. Dean Mercer arrived at 9:22 a.m. He took his position across the street. Nora watched him appear in the reflection of the coffee shop window and settled into the particular stillness that she had come to recognize as his signature. Patient, invisible to anyone not looking for him, certain of his own imperceptibility. He did not notice the first motorcycle until it was already parked at the end of the block. He did not notice the second until it pulled up beside the first. By the time there were 10 motorcycles, silent now, engines off, the riders standing beside their machines in leather and ink, and the particular physical presence of men who had never in their lives tried to disappear, Dean Mercer had gone still in a different way. The inventory-taking stillness was gone. In its place was something smaller. Travis stood at the center of the group on the sidewalk across from the coffee shop, directly in Dean's line of sight. He was not looking at Dean. He was looking at the window of the coffee shop, and he raised one hand, a small, deliberate wave, in Nora's direction. Inside, Nora raised her coffee cup in response. More motorcycles arrived. 20, 35. The sound reached Nora through the soles of her feet and the vibration in the window glass, a deep, rolling presence that she felt before she understood its scale. Cindy, beside her, had stopped pretending to look at her phone. She was watching the street with an expression Nora couldn't entirely read, something between disbelief and something that was trying not to be tears. She turned the phone so Nora could see the screen. She had been counting. 67, the screen read. Then she updated it. 79. By 9:47 a.m., Officer Ray Dunton, dispatched in response to a call from a nearby business owner about an unusual gathering, arrived on the scene and found 103 members of the Hells Angels standing peacefully on a public sidewalk in Bakersfield, California, in broad daylight, engaged in no illegal activity whatsoever. He also found Dean Mercer, who had made the mistake of trying to leave and had walked directly into Buck Reeves, who was the size of a refrigerator and had the particular stillness of a man who has decided not to move. Buck had said nothing. He hadn't needed to. He had simply stood in Dean's path and looked at him with the patient, total attention of a man with nowhere else to be. Dean had his phone out. He was calling someone, the police, Travis assumed. And that was fine. That was exactly fine. Officer Dunton walked toward Travis, and Travis met him halfway. "Is there something going on here?" Dunton asked. Travis looked at the coffee shop window, where Nora Callahan was visible, her face calm, her hands around her cup, watching the street. He looked back at Dunton. "We're having coffee," Travis said. "It's a public sidewalk, officer." Dunton followed his gaze. He looked at the coffee shop. He looked at the man by the sidewalk, now surrounded by the unmistakable stillness of people who had made a decision. He looked at his phone, where he had the stalking report Nora had filed, the one the department had responded to by suggesting she keep a log. Something shifted in Dunton's face, a recalibration. "That the individual from the stalking report?" he asked quietly. Travis said nothing. He didn't need to. Dunton walked toward Dean Mercer. The arrest of Dean Mercer on October 27th was, from a legal standpoint, straightforward. When Officer Ray Dunton ran the partial plate number from Nora's log against the grey sedan parked 2 blocks east of Morrow's Coffee, it came back registered to a Dean Allen Mercer, age 44, of Fresno. A background check conducted within the hour surfaced a restraining order violation in Tulare County from 2019 and a dismissed stalking charge in Sacramento from 2016, dismissed because the victim had declined to testify, a fact that the arresting detective would later describe as a pattern. Dean Mercer had done this before. He had selected women who lived alone, who had limited support networks, who existed at what he had apparently calculated were the margins of institutional protection. He had been patient and careful and methodical. He had chosen Nora Callahan because she was deaf and lived alone and had a predictable schedule, and because he had decided that these things made her safe to pursue. He had been wrong about all of it. The Bakersfield Californian ran a brief item the following week. Local woman stalker arrested. Hells Angels credited with creating the conditions for law enforcement response. The reporter had gotten most of it right. What the article couldn't fully capture was the quality of the thing that had happened on that sidewalk. 103 people choosing, without obligation, without payment, without anything more than a shared human understanding of what was unacceptable, to make themselves visible in someone else's defense. Nora read the article 3 times. She found it accurate but insufficient, the way most descriptions of important things were. She met with Travis twice more in the weeks that followed, both times at the diner on Brundage Lane, both times over coffee, both times through the quiet medium of typed messages and the notebook she kept in her bag. He was not what she had expected, though she was honest enough to acknowledge that her expectations had been built on the same cultural scaffolding she spent her whole life dismantling. She had expected someone coarser, less patient, less curious. He was curious about her work, the graphic design, the way she moved through visual space. He showed her a tattoo on his left forearm, a design he'd had done 20 years ago that had faded unevenly with age, and asked without self-consciousness whether it could be salvaged or whether he should start fresh. She looked at it for a long time and told him through her notebook that the original design had good bones, that good bones could always be worked with. "Story of my life," he typed back. And she wasn't sure exactly whether he was talking about the tattoo. Cindy met Travis at the third coffee, and the two of them managed a halting, warmly awkward conversation that required no interpreter, because Travis had downloaded a basic ASL app on his phone and was clearly earnestly trying to learn the sign for thank you. He got it approximately right on the third attempt, and Cindy's expression was the kind that Nora had learned to read as something close to undone. Officer Ray Dunton came to Nora's apartment in early November with paperwork related to the case. He was a compact, careful man who moved with the deliberateness of someone who chose his words before he used them. She had Cindy present to interpret. When the paperwork was handled and Dunton stood to leave, he paused at the door. He said something to Cindy, who interpreted, "I want to say I'm sorry. The response when you first called should have been different. You documented exactly what you were supposed to document, and we should have acted on it. I'm sorry that we didn't." Nora looked at him for a moment. She picked up her notebook and wrote one line and held it up. "Do better next time. There will be a next time." Dunton read it. He nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and Cindy didn't bother to interpret it, because some things carry across without translation. The stalking had lasted 23 days from the first confirmed sighting to the arrest. In those 23 days, Nora Callahan had been dismissed by a department that was supposed to protect her, had built an alliance with a man the world had told her to fear, and had watched 100 strangers materialize on a Bakersfield sidewalk because someone had asked them to. She thought about this often in the months that followed. She thought about Dean Mercer, who had looked at her and seen a set of limitations. She thought about the distance between what he had calculated and what had actually been true. He had seen deaf, alone, predictable, vulnerable. He had not seen perceptive beyond most people's comprehension, surrounded by more community than she had sometimes given herself credit for, possessed of a particular kind of courage that came from 40 years of proving the limitations wrong. He had not seen the things that mattered because he had been too busy seeing the things that fit his story. Nora had spent her whole life in a world that did the same thing, at lower stakes. The world looked at her and arranged a set of assumptions like furniture. She would need help, she would struggle, she would be less. The world was not always wrong, but it was wrong about what the help looked like, and who it came from, and what the struggling produced. It had produced this, a woman who could read a room, a street, a parking lot, a reflection in a shop window, who had built, without fully recognizing she was building it, a life dense with people who understood the difference between what someone looked like and what they were. Travis sent her a photo in December, the tattoo on his left forearm, freshly reworked by a tattooist in town. The bones of the original design were still there, the ones she had identified across a diner table. Around them, the artist had added new line work, cleaner, sharper, built on the foundation that had survived 20 years of being misread. She looked at it for a long time. She typed back, "Good bones always work." His response came 3 minutes later. "Told you. Story of my life." She set down the phone and looked out the window of her apartment. The window she had stood at in October, looking down at a dark street and a grey sedan and the shape of her own fear. The street below was ordinary. The oak tree across the way was bare now, its branches articulate against the winter sky, and there was no sedan beneath it. There was a couple walking a dog. There was the yellow warmth of Walter's hall light, visible through his transom window as it was every night. The world was full of things that people were certain about until they weren't. Nora had never needed to hear to know that the most dangerous people in any room were not always the loudest ones. The most dangerous assumption was not that a woman couldn't defend herself. It was that the world had agreed on who the protectors were and had stopped looking for them everywhere else. She opened her design software and began to work. Outside, the December night settled over Bakersfield, cool and quiet, the kind of quiet that is not absence, but fullness. Every frequency of a living city, present and real, whether or not you had the ears to hear it. She had something better. She always had. She had learned to read what everyone else forgot to look at, and the world she had discovered was full of unlikely guardians, if you knew how to ask.